Well, welcome to the channel, viewers. Dr. JWA, just theologist since 1994, just running over Tickle versus Giggle, a fork in the road for Australia and institutional integrity, a behavioural-constitutional analysis, episode 3, when rights started colliding inside the same system. Rain strikes the train windows while fluorescent light washes across exhausted commuters travelling home through the darkening city. Nobody appears rebellious, nobody appears dangerous, yet across offices, schools, hospitals, universities, media systems, digital platforms and government departments, something psychologically severe has begun reorganising Australian life underneath ordinary routine. The progressive institutional conditioning of the population toward administratively approved reality compliance. And that is the deeper constitutional exposure underneath the Tickle versus Giggle ruling. The case revealed more than competing rights claims. It revealed institutional systems increasingly asserting sovereign interpretive authority over foundational human categories themselves: woman, sex, identity, reality, meaning. The constitutional crisis emerges because the system now attempts to simultaneously preserve women's protections, preserve gender identity protections, preserve institutional legitimacy, preserve discrimination architecture, and preserve public obedience to increasingly unstable definitions underneath all of them. And that collision cannot remain psychologically neutral, because once citizens begin recognizing that institutional authority may now possess power to progressively redefine foundational reality categories while penalizing resistance to those redefinitions, public trust destabilizes beneath the surface. The accountant lowers his voice during a lunch discussion. The nurse avoids certain conversations entirely. The university student learns that survival increasingly depends less upon honest recognition and more upon performing administratively approved linguistic ritual. And that behavioural adaptation matters because authoritarian systems do not always emerge through visible brutality first. Modern managerial authoritarianism emerges through semantic enforcement, reputational intimidation, procedural fear, institutional dependency, linguistic policying, and psychological self-regulation beneath consequence uncertainty. The population gradually learns which observations feel professionally unsafe, which truths create reputational exposure, which definitions cannot openly be challenged, and which institutional narratives require public participation regardless of private conviction. And viewers, that is where constitutional destabilisation begins entering the nervous system itself. The law no longer merely regulates behaviour, it increasingly regulates permissible interpretation of reality. And once institutions begin administratively reconstructing reality categories, while simultaneously conditioning citizens into behavioural compliance with those reconstructions, the state gradually approaches illegitimate sovereignty over perception itself. Now that is civilisationally catastrophic, because constitutional inheritance originally assumed human authority remained limited, reality preceded government, law recognized created order rather than reconstructing it, and institutional power operated beneath divine sovereign restraint rather than replacing it. But modern institutional systems increasingly behave as though administrative authority itself now possesses power to redefine the boundaries of truth, identity, meaning, and recognition independent of any higher moral limitation above itself. And that is the deeper theological rupture bleeding underneath the ruling, not merely legal reinterpretation, complete, absolute, divine displacement. Because once institutions progressively sever themselves from divine restraint, authority no longer governs through moral limitation. It governs through adaptive behavioural management instead. And viewers, the result is not liberation. It is psychological fragmentation disguised as procedural compassion. The cafe still opens beneath the rain, the trains still arrive on schedule, and government officials still speak calmly beneath national flags and constitutional symbolism. But beneath the outward continuity, another reality quietly expands. A population increasingly pressured to psychologically adapt around institutional meanings. Many no longer believe they are fully permitted to question honestly. And that produces emotional exhaustion, social distrust, fractured communication, internalized fear, identity instability, and gradual detachment from shared civilization, coherence itself. Because once institutional systems begin demanding behavioral submission, to administratively reconstruct reality while simultaneously punishing non-compliance through reputational and procedural mechanisms, constitutional order quietly mutates into soft totalitarian management infrastructure. The train disappears deeper into the tunnel. Government announcements echo mechanically through fluorescent silence, while passengers stare motionlessly into illuminated screens. And beneath the ordinary Australian atmosphere, another truth slowly surfaces. The deeper national crisis was never merely about one court ruling. It was about whether institutions still recognise limits above themselves they are not morally permitted to cross. Because once authority begins acting as its own highest source of truth, legitimacy and definition, constitutional order no longer merely weakens. It begins replacing the very restraints that once protected humanity from power detached from reality, morality, and ultimately God Himself.